Enchanted chains bit into Draken's flesh as he strained against them. He gave no thought to their sting as he stared into the pit. The emptiness to his prison paled in comparison to the scent of freedom. So few lives remained, and when they perished, he would be released. Hatred surged within him, bitter and hard. He drank it in like a potent liquor and relished the flavor. It caused his whole frame to tremble. The races of Lumineia had earned their fate. His lip curled as he felt his chains weaken. It wouldn't be long now. These petty mortals had fought well, but to no avail. This time, their suffering would end in death. This time, he would be triumphant. His army was on the verge of victory, a victory that he had been denied 10,000 years ago. But how had he failed on his first attempt? His twisted mind grappled for an answer, but it had eluded him for centuries and remained out of reach. His magic flared with his rising anger and crackled across his arms like coarse lightning. The explosion of energy was siphoned off by the chains almost the moment it appeared. Their growing weakness caused him to sneer at the darkened opening in the opposite wall. "I will be free, human," he growled at the empty corridor. "And my vow will be fulfilled. Every member of your race will bleed to their last breath, and it will be your doing." Draeken snarled when his voice echoed into silence. "They would have been slaves," he bellowed, "but they would have survived." "I would rather be dead than a slave." The words were seared into Draken's memory. The voice was that of a dead man. Draeken argued anyway, unwilling to admit that a mere human had trapped him. Alone, he screamed at his foe. The lapse in sanity caused the tactical part of Draken's mind to reassert itself, and the madness reluctantly ceded ground. His eyes narrowed as he regained control over his consciousness. His fingers clenched into fists. When had solitude become so strong? In the beginning it had been nothing more than a fragmented whisper of his mind, but thousands of years by himself had changed that. Now it was like a rabid lion, seething with rage and hate. Draeken vowed to keep it at bay, but even as he made the promise, he heard its cackling laughter. Draeken gritted his teeth. After everything he'd endured, solitude would not be his undoing. He clenched his fists and drew in a deep breath. The scent of sulphur and brimstone filled his nostrils, and their familiarity focused his mind. Like a caged beast, solitude withdrew, not far, but enough. Draeken turned his attention to his forces. He could not allow himself to fail. Not this close. 3 of his generals had been killed, leaving only war, the last and the greatest. How much more can the races withstand? He thought. Even gathered as they were, they should have fallen days ago. His gaze fell on his shackles. Enchanted with the hope of the races, they were impervious to anything but the destruction of their source. Rend their flesh. Draeken clenched his jaw against Solitude's maniacal howl, and then forced a twisted smile. His victory was at hand, and nothing could be allowed to mar it. Then a distant sound caused him to look upward. The rumbling of battle came from higher in his citadel. His eyebrows tightened as he heard his fiends screaming in pain and the sounds of death. A moment later the conflict spilled into the corridor opposite him. Black bodies writhed and twisted as they fought each other. Draeken sent a mental order for them to hold, but the fiends refused to obey. In seconds, the losers were torn to shreds, and the victors prowled closer. Then another figure appeared. Striding between the placid fiends, he reached the lip and stared across the gap at Draeken. The man's skin was the color of ash, and boasted numerous tattooed symbols on his torso and arms. His hair and eyes were black, but his hands held no weapon. Sheathed, a sword hung on his back. Draeken blinked into his mage sight and examined the man. What he saw surprised him, for he saw a kindred spirit. Solitude smiled, and that alone was enough cause for him to hesitate. "I am Dukelik," the man began. Draeken regarded him for a long time, then dismissed him with curt, "Kill him." 1,000 fiends heard his voice and came flooding down from the upper levels of the ancient forge. They collided with the subverted ones like an avalanche and forced them toward Draken's prison. Dukelik had nowhere to go. Without hesitation, he jumped into the pit. 50 feet he plummeted downward, but he landed easily. Draeken elevated his opinion of the man. He evidently bore a natural talent when it came to body magic. The fall would have broken the legs of a common man. In seconds, the subverted fiends followed. Black forms shrieked and jumped, trying to land beside their newfound master. The shape of the prison made that difficult. Designed to hold the most powerful criminals, the pit's walls were sheer. Shaped like a giant cylinder, the floor of the prison did not touch the walls. Rather, the floor was a suspended circle of stone with a gap on all sides. Some of the unsuccessful fiends fell into it. Their shrill cries reverberated upward as they fell into the molten lava of the volcano. Draeken and Solitude smiled in unison. The screams of the dying was something they both missed. The remainder of Dukelik's force gathered around him, but the Draken's loyal fiends far outnumbered them. They poured from the opening in a cascade of twisting black flesh. The moment they landed, they fell on their previous allies in a frenzy of teeth and claws. Blood soon slicked the stone, but Dukelik fought with discipline. Sword in hand, he directed his forces into a phalanx that repelled the first fiends that tried to attack. Bellowing in rage, he held the center of the line. Draeken looked down on the battle with no attempt to hide his pleasure. Chained to a prison wall yielded few entertainments, and he couldn't let this one pass him by.